Hi, I'm Jeff Helgeson here at Heirloom Books at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois. Continuing a discussion of narratives surrounding the Iliad of Homer, I'm going to need to somewhat adjust the chronology of the writing of these texts in order to address the sequence of events represented within them. Instead of beginning with the Odyssey, which I clearly remember Professor David Green at the University of Chicago describing as Homer's sequel to his earlier work, I think it's necessary to first move forward about 400 years to Aeschylus and his tragic trilogy, the Oresteia. In it, Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek army that eventually conquered Troy, who had been forced to offer his oldest daughter, Iphigenia, as a sacrifice at the start of the war, victoriously returns to his home at Mycena, only to suffer revenge and the consequences of a generations-old curse at the hand of his wife Clytemnestra, Helen of Troy's half-sister. You see, the great-grandsons of Tantalus, the mortal child of Zeus who'd attempted to honor the gods by feeding them flesh of his own son, Peliops, and was condemned to eternal punishment as a result, Agamemnon and his brother Menelaus's father, Atreus, one of the two sons of the resurrected sacrifice, had continued the dark family legacy. When his brother had succeeded in getting Atreus' wife to violate her wedding vows, the betrayed husband sought revenge by having two of his nephews killed and served to their father in a meal. And this had resulted in a curse being placed upon him and all of his descendants. Now, you got that? Returning home from Troy with Cassandra, the unbelieved future-perceiving daughter of King Priam, as his consort, hesitantly walking across a purple carpet in an honor typically reserved for the gods, Agamemnon enters his palace and is killed in revenge for having agreed to the sacrifice of Iphigenia by his wife and her lover, who she had taken during her husband's absence, Heirloom, Agamemnon's cousin, the only surviving son of his father's brother. Then, in revenge for the murder of her father, Agamemnon's daughter, Electra, succeeds in getting her younger brother, Orestes, to kill both their mother and her lover. In response, the Furies, a group of punishing female demons with snake-like hair, pursue Orestes throughout the known world until he's finally given assistance by Apollo in an appeal to Athena to absolve his guilt, transforming his persecutors into defendants of the repentant. Then, somewhat later, according to the playwright Euripides, since the gods uniformly reject human sacrifice, Orestes comes to discover that his sister Iphigenia had not been killed at all, but instead had become a priestess to the virgin goddess Diana during the many years which had passed. On a moral level, John Harrington, professor of Greek at Yale University, has asserted what this resolution of the sequence of revenge demonstrates is a great 5th century transition from the very old ways of thinking to what Harrington calls the very new, essentially a change from a system of conservative tyranny to a liberal social order based upon ethics and the principles of democracy. In terms of historical context, this began what has been termed the Golden Age of Greece, period of about 80 years, which included such individuals as Aeschylus, Sophocles, Aristophanes, and Euripides, as well as Pericles, Herodotus, Hippocrates, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Moving back in time for what Herodotus calculated as about 12 generations to Homer's sequel for the Iliad, the Odyssey begins, as did the previous work, 10 years into events, with the evocation, "Sing, O goddess of the man of many ways," or devices, or twists, or turns, or, as the 1960s English rock band Cream would have it, tales of brave Ulysses. For reasons probably only known to Homer, which James Joyce also adhered to in his great novel written during the First World War, however, the story doesn't commence with the long-suffering hero. Rather, it starts with Zeus thinking about Heirloom, who had been killed by Orestes. But then Athena brings up the question of Odysseus, who's been held captive as a male consort on an island for 7 years by a daughter of Atlas, the sea nymph Calypso, with Poseidon, who's angry towards Odysseus due to the blinding of his Cyclops son Polyphemus, absent from the council of the gods. Athena succeeds in winning consent for Odysseus to return to his own home on the island of Ithaca, getting Hermes dispatched to secure his release. Athena then sets off herself to visit the long-absent man's son, Telemachus, now having become 21 years of age, and encourages him to go off in search of his father. Also, due to Odysseus' long absence following the end of the Trojan War, it's been assumed that the king is dead, and his still beautiful wife, Penelope, like Helen before her, has attracted a large number of suitors who have moved into her palace and begun consuming its wealth. Now, still hoping for her husband's return, however, patient Penelope, as is shown in the logo for Heirloom books, has devised a plan to delay making a choice of a new husband by saying that she must first weave a burial shroud for the father of Odysseus, Laertes, depicting his adventures as one of the Argonauts who had journeyed in his youth with Jason in a quest to bring the golden fleece back to Greece. After working on this project during the day, she then unweaves what she has done in secret at night, consequently postponing her selection of a new spouse. When Telemachus goes off in search of information about his father, he visits Nestor, as well as Menelaus and Helen, who are now happily reunited, and is told that his father could still be alive. But the suitors have conspired to kill Telemachus when he returns to Ithaca, something about which he's warned by Athena. Meanwhile, released from the island of Calypso, Odysseus sets out on a raft and travels for 18 days until Poseidon sends a storm, causing this ancient mariner to abandon his craft and swim for 2 days and nights before reaching land. Naked and exhausted, like a newborn cast ashore from the womb of the sea, he is found by a Phaeacian princess named Nausicaa and brought to her father's palace where, according to a tradition of hospitality, no one ever knowing for sure when a god disguised as a wayfarer might appear, Odysseus is received as a guest and relates the story of his wanderings following the fall of Troy. Now, as observed by Eric Auerbach in his book, Mimesis, The Representation of Reality in Western Literature. The Homeric style is to leave nothing in obscurity. And therefore, Odysseus describes the 11 events which preceded his arrival among the Phoenicians, making a total of 12 adventures, a number of signs in the zodiac and months of the year. These episodes include landing on a coast where his crew is seduced by a pleasant lotus-eating lifestyle and must be forced back to their ships to continue their journey home, being captured by and blinding the giant one-eyed Cyclops, Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, to whom Odysseus identifies himself as No Man, visiting the King of the Winds and becoming blown far off course, encountering a tribe of man-eating giants who destroy all but one of his ships, having his remaining crew turned to swine and being kept as the lover of the goddess Circe, journeying to the land of the dead like Gilgamesh to obtain advice about how to return to his home from the transgendered prophet Tiresias, who Hera had blinded for revealing that females enjoy sex more than males, unexpectedly seeing the shade of his own mother, as well as those of Agamemnon and Ajax, who refuses to speak to him, apparently still angry about not having been given Achilles' armor. During his absence in the land of the dead, however, Odysseus' crew, by then returned to human form, kill and eat the oxen of the sun, therefore all becoming condemned to death. Then there are the challenges of, as the lyrics from Cream would have it, the sirens sweetly singing, treacherous currents, the monster with tentacles which pulls sailors from the decks of their ships, the island of Calypso, and his arrival among the Phoenicians, who ultimately agree to take Odysseus to his home on Ithaca. Appearing as a stranger, although recognized by his old dog Argos, named for the ship on which Odysseus' father had once sailed, the long-absent king is abused by his wife's suitors, who have discovered the secret of the tapestry, and Penelope has become forced to choose a new husband, saying that she will marry the man who can string the bow left behind by Odysseus and shoot an arrow from it through a line of 12 axe blades, their handles having been removed, one for each month of the year, sign of the zodiac, and coincidentally adventure experienced by her husband. Of course, claiming a chance to try as someone who had once fought upon the windy plains of Troy after the others have failed, only Odysseus, a sun hero, as I once heard Joseph Campbell describe him about 8 blocks from here at Mundelein College, can meet this challenge, which he easily does, while his son, Telemachus, clears the other men's weapons from the hall. Then, together, as father and son, they kill all the suitors who had previously planned to murder Telemachus, so one of them could usurp Odysseus' throne. As a further test of his identity, Penelope then asks to have the bed from her chamber brought into the main hall of the palace, and her long-absent husband tells her no man can fulfill that request, because its headboard had been made from a living olive tree around which the room had been built, and the two of them are reunited as husband and wife, although their was also a strange prediction offered earlier by a singer of epic adventures in the palace, involving the confusion of an oar with a willowing stick that suggests one day Odysseus may venture out upon another journey, something which Dante, Alfred Lord Tennyson, and even I, in my first produced play titled Ithaca, followed up on at different times. But that, as the saying goes, is another story. This then brings me 1200 or so years later to the Latin poet Virgil's description of the Trojan side of things in the Aeneid, a work the undertaking of which appears to have been strongly encouraged by the first Roman emperor Augustus Caesar as a kind of culturally moral example for his citizens. It is essentially a parallel narrative to the adventures of Odysseus, in which the second best warrior of the Trojans, a son of Aphrodite named Aeneas, carrying his aged father on his back and leading his young son by the hand out from their besieged city, then guides a group of refugee survivors off on a journey across the Mediterranean Sea in search of a place to create a new and better life for themselves and their descendants. After journeying past the dangerous currents near Sicily, these displaced persons encounter the Cyclops minded by Odysseus and then venture on to Carthage along the north coast of Africa. There, the queen, Dido, under the influence of Cupid at the behest of Mama Aphrodite, falls in love with Aeneas and is told about the adventures his seafaring caravan of migrants have so far encountered, later killing herself without his awareness after Aeneas eventually feels compelled to leave her behind under the pressure of destiny so that his people can create a new nation for themselves within their promised land on the western coast of Italy. Aeneas' last view of the receding shoreline of Carthage, unknowingly, is the illumination of its queen's funeral pyre. Like Odysseus and Gilgamesh before him, upon arrival in Italy, Aeneas, obtaining the talisman of a golden bough, ventures to the land of the dead in order to learn the fate of his people from his father, who died earlier during the journey, and is surprised to find Dido already there. But she refuses to answer when he asks if he somehow had been the cause of her death. Then, after speaking with his father, Aeneas returns to lead his people in a long struggle with the original inhabitants of their new land, eventually culminating in a single combat, which is won by Aeneas over an indigenous leader named Turnus. Possessing characteristics of loyalty to duty, devout belief, and moral strength, Aeneas, essentially, was the role model Emperor Augustus wanted for the citizens of Rome. But Virgil also used his work to suggest the coming of a new lord who would one day rule the world, and although he may have specifically had his imperial patron in mind, later writers, including Dante, came to perceive this prediction as one which anticipated a divine savior of mankind, making Virgil good pagan offering guidance throughout the early Christian era. Now, what each of these three literary works, the Oresteia, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, has in common, in addition to the aftermath of the Trojan War, is a broad contextual frame related to the establishment of social and cultural order following times of extreme chaos. For Aeschylus was the establishment of democracy after a time of autocratic rule. For Homer, it was the bringing of domestic order following a 20-year interruption. And for Virgil, the issue was outlining the foundation of an empire after a time of civil war and decadence. In fact, as a result of having been on the wrong side of this moment in cultural history with the publication of his Manual for Infidelity, The Art of Love, the Roman poet Ovid, author of the Metamorphoses, found himself banished by the emperor and writing his mythological masterpiece in a failed attempt to regain imperial favor. With regard to ongoing relevance, in a time of no justice and no peace, as well as sharp contrast between autocratic and democratic ideals, it might be useful to be reminded, in the words of the philosopher Epicurus from about a century after Aeschylus, that it is not possible to live pleasantly without living honorably and justly, nor again to live a life of honor and justice without living pleasantly. Next time, in my Doctor Who sense of the order of things, I'll be moving back to the work of someone who, for Aeschylus at any rate, was a member of an upstart younger generation, Sophocles, with his interpretation of a much earlier mythological time in the three Theban plays of the Oedipus cycle. Heirloom Books is located at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois, and is open 7 days a week from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 7 o'clock in the